The winter airbed at Robert Chen's face as he stepped out of his sleek black car, handing the keys to the valet outside New York's grandest hotel. The annual Children's Hospital fundraiser was the last place he wanted to be on a Friday evening, but his PR team had insisted. It'll be good for the company image, they said. At 45, Robert had built RobTech into a technology empire worth billions, but lately, something felt empty about his success. The hotel lobby sparkled with crystal chandeliers and the quiet murmur of New York's elite discussing their latest investments. Robert adjusted his blue silk tie, a nervous habit he developed over years of business meetings. A waiter offered him champagne, but he opted for water instead. He needed a clear head tonight. There were potential investors to impress. As he made his way through the crowd, Robert couldn't help but notice how different he felt from the young programmer who started coding in his garage 20 years ago. Back then, life was simpler. Back then, he still had Maya. The thought of his ex-wife made his chest tighten. He pushed the memory away, like he always did when it surfaced. The divorce had been 15 years ago, and dwelling on the past wouldn't change anything. Or so he thought, until that moment. He was in the middle of a conversation with a hospital board member when he heard a familiar laugh, soft and musical, exactly as he remembered it. Robert turned, and the world seemed to stop. There she was, Maya Lin, looking even more beautiful than she had 15 years ago. Her black hair now had supple strands of silver that caught the light, and her eyes still crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She was wearing a simple dark green dress that made her look elegant without trying too hard. That had always been her style. But it wasn't Maya that made Robert's heart nearly stop. It was the teenage boy standing next to her. The boy was tall and lanky, with a slight awkwardness that comes with being 14 or 15. He had Maya's gentle eyes, but everything else, from the way he stood to the slight furrow in his brow as he looked at his phone, was like looking in a mirror of Robert's younger self. The resemblance was so striking that Robert nearly dropped his water glass. "Mrs. Lin," called out the hospital director, waving Maya over. "We've been hoping to discuss your son's incredible coding project for the children's ward." Robert watched, frozen in place, as Maya and the boy made their way closer. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears. Maya was almost to their group when she finally noticed him. Her steps faltered for just a moment, but she quickly recovered. She had always been good at maintaining composure. "Robert," she said softly, and hearing his name in her voice again after 15 years made him feel like all the air had been sucked out of the room. "Maya," he managed to reply, his throat suddenly dry. His eyes moved between her and the boy, who was now looking up from his phone with curiosity. "Mom?" the boy asked, sensing the tension. "Do you know him?" The question hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Maya's fingers tightened around her clutch, and Robert could see the slight tremor in her hand, a tell she had when she was nervous, one he remembered from their years together. "Jay, this is Robert Chen," Maya said carefully. "He's an old friend." Robert barely heard her introduction. His mind was racing, doing calculations he should have done years ago. The boy, Jay, looked about 14. The divorce was 15 years ago. Maya had been acting strange in those final months, trying to talk to him about something important, but he had been too busy with the company's first major product launch to really listen. "It's nice to meet you, Mr. Chen," Jay said politely, extending his hand. "I'd actually used some of RobTech's development tools for my hospital project. Your coding framework is incredible." Robert shook his hand automatically, feeling like he was moving through a dream. The boy's grip was firm, confident, just like Robert's father had taught him. But Robert had never taught this boy anything, had he? The hospital director, oblivious to the tension, launched into an enthusiastic description of Jay's project, a virtual reality system he developed to help young patients cope with long hospital stays. Robert heard the words prodigy and innovative approach, but he couldn't focus on the details. All he could think about was how Jay's enthusiasm for technology mirrored his own at that age, how the boy's hands moved expressively as he talked about his code, a gesture Robert had seen in videos of himself giving presentations. Maya wouldn't meet his eyes, and that told him everything he needed to know. The world tilted on its axis as the truth hit him. He had a son he'd never known about. a son who was already following in his technological footsteps without even knowing it. The evening stretched on like a surreal dream. Robert found himself unable to leave the gala, circling the room but always keeping Maya and Jay in his line of sight. He watched as Jay demonstrated his project to other guests, noticed how Maya beamed with pride at her son's achievements, and felt an overwhelming sense of loss for all the moments he'd missed. As the evening drew to a close, Robert watched them prepare to leave. He knew he should say something, do something, but what could possibly make up for 15 years of absence? As Maya and Jay headed toward the exit, Maya paused and looked back at him. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and in that moment, Robert knew with absolute certainty that his carefully structured life was about to change forever. Robert couldn't sleep that night. He sat in his penthouse office, staring at old photos on his laptop, pictures from 15 years ago that he hadn't looked at in ages. There was Maya at their favorite coffee shop, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug. Another showed them hiking in the mountains, back when they were just two young dreamers with big plans. The last photo was from their final Christmas together, and now he could see what he'd missed before, the way Maya's hand rested protectively over her stomach, the nervous smile on her face. The sun was barely rising when Robert finally called his assistant to clear his schedule for the day. He had to know the truth. Through his company's connections, he managed to find Maya's work address. She was a creative director at a tech education nonprofit. The irony wasn't lost on him. At 9 a.m., Robert stood in the lobby of a modest office building, feeling completely out of place in his expensive suit. When Maya walked through the front doors and saw him, she didn't look surprised. Instead, she just looked tired, like she'd been carrying a heavy weight for far too long. "We need to talk," Robert said quietly. Maya nodded. "I know. There's a small park around the corner." They walked in silence, the morning rush of the city swirling around them. The park was really just a tiny square with a few benches, but it was quiet enough. They sat down, leaving careful space between them. "Jay is my son, isn't he?" Robert's voice was barely above a whisper. Maya took a deep breath, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Yes." The word hit him like a physical blow, even though he'd known it was coming. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I tried." Maya's voice cracked slightly. "That last month before the divorce, I tried to tell you 3 times, but you were always rushing to another meeting, another conference call, another emergency at the office. The day I finally got up the courage to say it, you told me you were moving to California for 6 months to open the new office. You said our marriage couldn't handle the distance, that maybe we should take a break." Robert remembered that day. He'd been focused on securing their biggest client yet, seeing the breakup as a necessary sacrifice for his company's success. "You could have told me after." Maya turned to look at him directly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "Could I? You changed your phone number. Moved across the country. Your lawyers made it clear you didn't want any contact. By the time Jay was born, you were all over the news as the next big tech success story. Your life had moved on. But he's my son." Robert's voice rose slightly, drawing attention from a passing jogger. He lowered it again. "I had a right to know." "And he had a right to a father who would be there for him," Maya replied firmly. "Not just financially, but actually there. Parent-teacher conferences, sick days, birthday parties, all of it. Could you have done that then, Robert? Can you honestly say you would have chosen us over RobTech?" The question hung in the air between them. Robert wanted to say yes, but they both knew the truth. 15 years ago, he'd been obsessed with success, with proving himself. The company had been everything. "Tell me about him," Robert said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "Please." Maya's expression softened. "He's brilliant, but you saw that last night. He taught himself to code when he was 10. He's kind, volunteers at the children's hospital teaching kids basic programming. He's quiet until you get him talking about something he's passionate about, then you can't shut him up." She smiled fondly. "He has your focus when he's working on a project, and your habit of forgetting to eat when he's deep into coding." Robert closed his eyes, trying to picture all the moments he'd missed. Does he know anything about me?" "He knows you're his biological father," Maya said carefully. "I told him when he was 12 and started asking questions. He knows we were married, that we divorced before he was born. I've never spoken badly about you to him, but," she paused, choosing her words carefully, He's formed his own opinions about absent parents. The words stung, but Robert knew he deserved them. The project he showed last night, the VR system for kids in the hospital, it's incredible. He did that all on his own. Mostly. He had some help from my colleague who teaches advanced programming, but the concept and most of the execution was all Jay. He's been working on it for months. Pride crept into Maya's voice. The hospital is actually planning to implement it. Robert felt a strange mixture of pride and pain. His son was already making a difference in the world, and he'd had nothing to do with it. I want to be part of his life, Robert said suddenly. I know I don't deserve it, and I know it's 15 years too late, but I want to try, if he's willing. Maya was quiet for a long moment. That's not my decision to make anymore. Jay is old enough to choose for himself. But Robert, she turned to face him fully. If he gives you a chance, you can't disappoint him. He's not a business deal you can postpone when something more important comes up. He's a teenager who's grown up wondering why his father never cared enough to be around. I understand, Robert said, though his heart was racing at the thought of trying to connect with a son who might want nothing to do with him. I'll talk to him, Maya said finally, standing up. I'll tell him you want to meet properly, but the decision has to be his. As Maya walked away, Robert remained on the bench, watching the morning sun climb higher in the sky. For the first time in his life, all his business success felt hollow compared to the chance of getting to know his son. He pulled out his phone and, for the first time in years, started to reschedule meetings not for a business emergency, but for something far more important, family. A week after the park bench conversation, Robert sat nervously in an upscale cafe, his untouched coffee growing cold. Maya had texted him last night. Jay had agreed to meet, but he'd set his own terms. A public place. No longer than 30 minutes. His mother nearby at another table. When Jay walked in, wearing a dark blue hoodie and carrying his laptop bag, Robert's heart skipped a beat. The boy hesitated at the door, scanning the cafe until he spotted Robert. His face was carefully neutral as he approached the table. Hi, Jay said simply, sliding into the seat across from Robert. Up close, Robert could see the slight tension in his shoulders, the way his fingers drummed nervously on the table. Thank you for agreeing to meet, Robert said, trying to keep his voice steady. Would you like something to drink or eat? I'm good, Jay replied, his tone polite but distant. Mom said you wanted to talk. Robert had rehearsed this conversation 100 times in his head, but now all his carefully prepared words felt inadequate. I wanted to apologize, he started. And to explain, if you'll let me. Explain what? Jay's voice had an edge to it now. Why you left? Why you never came back? Why you couldn't spare 5 minutes in 15 years to even ask about me? The bitterness in his son's voice felt like a physical pain in Robert's chest. I didn't know about you, he said quietly. I know that doesn't excuse anything, but I truly didn't know. Right. Jay let out a short, humorless laugh. You were too busy building your empire to notice Mom was pregnant. I've read the articles about you, you know. Tech genius Robert Chen sacrifices everything for success. Guess that included us. At a nearby table, Robert noticed Maya shift slightly, clearly listening but letting them have this moment. You're right, Robert admitted. I was obsessed with success. I thought everything else could wait. My marriage, a family, real connections. I was wrong, and I've regretted it every day since. Must have been hard, sitting in your penthouse office feeling regretful, Jay muttered. He pulled out his laptop, opening it like a shield between them. Look, I agreed to this meeting because Mom asked me to. But I don't need a father figure now. I'm doing fine without one. I saw your hospital project, Robert tried, desperate to find some connection. It's brilliant. The way you integrated the VR feedback loops with emotional response monitoring. I've never seen anything like it. For a moment, Jay's eyes lit up, but he quickly caught himself. Yeah, well, I didn't do it to impress you. I did it because those kids need something to help them cope with long hospital stays. Not everyone is motivated by profit margins. The jab stung, but Robert pressed on. Tell me more about it, please. I'd really like to understand how you developed the concept. Jay studied him for a moment, suspicion warring with his natural enthusiasm for his project. Finally, his passion for the work won out. I got the idea after volunteering at the children's ward, he said, turning his laptop so Robert could see. There was this kid Tommy who'd been there for months. He was so lonely and scared. I started thinking about how virtual reality could create a space where kids like him could feel normal, maybe even forget they're in the hospital for a while. As Jay explained the technical details of his project, Robert noticed his son's walls starting to come down slightly. His hands moved animatedly as he talked about the programming challenges he overcome, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. It was like looking in a mirror of his younger self, before money and success had become his only goals. But then Robert's phone buzzed, his board chairman's number flashing on the screen. Without thinking, he glanced at it. It was a mistake. Jay's face immediately closed off. He snapped his laptop shut. "Don't worry. I know a board meeting is more important than this. It always was, right?" No, wait. Robert reached for his phone to turn it off, but Jay was already standing. "You know what's funny?" Jay said, his voice trembling slightly. "When I was younger, I used to dream about meeting you. I thought maybe you had some amazing reason for staying away, something that would make it all make sense. But the truth is simple, isn't it? You just didn't care enough to try." "That's not true," Robert protested, but Jay was already walking away. At the door, he paused and looked back. "Thanks for the coffee I didn't drink," he said. "Don't worry about trying to arrange another meeting. I've got a big project to finish, and you've got a company to run. Let's not waste each other's time." Robert watched helplessly as his son walked out. Maya got up from her table, giving Robert a look that mixed pity with something like understanding. She followed Jay out, leaving Robert alone with his cold coffee and the crushing weight of 15 years of absence. His phone buzzed again. Robert picked it up and, for the first time in his career, sent a message to his board: "Handle it without me. Family emergency." Then he sat there, trying to figure out how to fix something that had been broken for so long that the pieces might not fit together anymore. Outside, the city rushed by, unchanging and indifferent to one man's attempt to rebuild what he'd carelessly thrown away 15 years ago. Robert knew one thing for certain: if he wanted any chance with his son, he'd have to prove that this time things really would be different. The question was, after a lifetime of putting business first, did he even know how to put family first? 2 months after their disastrous coffee shop meeting, Robert was buried in work, trying to ignore the hollow feeling in his chest. He'd respected Jay's wishes and stayed away, though he found himself constantly checking the hospital's website for updates on the VR project. Late one Tuesday night, his phone lit up with Maya's number. His heart stopped. She'd never called him, not once since their park bench conversation. "Robert?" Maya's voice was shaking. "It's Jay. He's in the hospital." The world tilted on its axis. What happened? He collapsed during his coding club meeting. They think it might be his heart, some kind of rhythm problem they didn't catch in his regular checkups. They're running tests, but her voice broke. "The specialist they need is in Boston." Robert was already grabbing his keys. "Which hospital? I'm on my way." The hospital corridor was too bright, too sterile. Robert found Maya pacing outside a room in the cardiac unit, looking smaller and more vulnerable than he'd ever seen her. Through the window, he could see Jay lying in a hospital bed, wires and monitors surrounding him. The sight made Robert's knees weak. "The doctors say he needs a specialized procedure," Maya said without preamble. "There's a new treatment, but it's experimental. Insurance won't cover it." She ran her hands through her hair, a gesture of frustration he remembered from their marriage. "I've been on the phone with my bank trying to figure out loans." "I'll pay for everything," Robert said immediately. "Whatever he needs, wherever we need to go. I'll have my jet ready within the hour." Maya looked at him for a long moment. "I didn't call you for money." "I know," Robert said quietly. "But please let me help. It's the one thing I can actually do right now." Before Maya could respond, a commotion from Jay's room drew their attention. He was awake and arguing with the nurse. They rushed in to find him trying to reach for his laptop. "I have to finish the project," Jay was saying, his voice weak but determined. "The hospital kids are waiting for the update." "Jay," Maya's voice was stern despite her tears. "Stop. Your heart is more important than any project." "But I promised Tommy I'd add the space exploration module this week. He's been looking forward to it." Jay's face was pale, but his jaw had that stubborn set Robert recognized from his own mirror. "The project can wait," Robert said from the doorway. Jay's eyes darted to him, surprise mixing with his usual guardedness. "Why are you here?" "Because you're my son," Robert said simply. "And because I know what it's like to think a project is more important than your health. Trust me, it's not." "What would you know about it?" Jay challenged, though his voice was weaker now. "Your projects were always about making money." "You're right," Robert admitted, moving closer to the bed. "I spent years thinking the next big deal, the next product launch, the next million was what mattered. I missed out on the most important things in life because of it." He glanced at Maya, then back to Jay. "Don't make my mistakes." A doctor entered with a tablet, her face serious. "We have the test results. There's a condition affecting your heart's electrical system. It's treatable, but you need specialized care." She explained the procedure using medical terms that made Maya grip the bedrail tighter. "The treatment protocol is still in trials," the doctor continued. "Insurance companies consider it experimental. The cost." "Cost isn't an issue," Robert interrupted. "What's important is getting him the best care possible." Jay looked between his parents, his facade cracking slightly. For the first time, he looked like what he was, a scared 14-year-old kid. "Mom?" Maya moved to his side, taking his hand. "We're going to get you the help you need, honey. Your father's right about this." The next few hours were a blur of preparations. Robert's assistant arranged everything: the medical flight to Boston, the top specialist, the best hospital suite available. As they waited for the transport team, Robert noticed Jay typing one-handed on his phone. "What are you doing?" he asked softly. "Sending my project notes to Tommy's dad," Jay replied, his voice tired. "He's a programmer too. I want him to keep working on it while I'm away. The kids shouldn't have to wait." Robert felt something shift in his chest. Here was his son, sick and scared, still thinking about helping others. "You know," he said carefully, "when you're better, I know some VR developers who'd probably love to help expand your project. If you're interested." Jay was quiet for a moment. "I wouldn't want them to change it. It's not about fancy graphics or making money. It's about making kids feel less alone." "No changes," Robert promised. "Just support to help you make your vision happen. Your way." Jay studied him, then nodded slightly. It wasn't forgiveness or acceptance, but it was something. A tiny crack in the wall between them. As they prepared for the flight to Boston, Robert watched Maya smoothing Jay's hair back from his forehead, murmuring reassurances. He thought about all the moments like this he'd missed: the childhood illnesses, the scraped knees, the fever nights. He couldn't change the past, but as he watched the medical team prepare his son for transport, he made a silent vow: he wouldn't miss another moment. Not one. The Boston hospital room became their world for 2 weeks. Robert surprised everyone, including himself, by not leaving once. He slept on the uncomfortable couch, lived on hospital coffee, and for the first time in his life, completely ignored his company's calls. His assistant handled the daily operations, sending him only the most critical updates via text. Jay's procedure had gone well, but recovery was slow. In those quiet hospital hours, something began to change between father and son. It started small, Jay asking Robert to hand him his water, Robert learning exactly how his son liked his pillows arranged. They didn't talk much at first, but the silence became less heavy. One night, when Maya had gone to the hotel to get real sleep, Jay spoke up unexpectedly. "Why did you really stay?" he asked, his voice quiet in the dim room. Robert looked up from his laptop where he'd been answering essential emails. "Because I've already missed too much," he said honestly. "I don't want to miss anything else. Even boring stuff like watching me sleep." "Even that." Robert closed his laptop. "Especially that." Jay was quiet for a moment, fiddling with his blanket. "You know, you're nothing like I imagined." "What did you imagine?" "Some cold businessman who only cared about money. Mom had this old magazine with you on the cover, The Man Who Never Sleeps. The article talked about how you worked 20 hours a day, how you turned down vacations, how your office was your real home." Robert winced. "I remember that article. I was proud of it at the time. Thought it made me sound dedicated." "Did it make you happy?" Jay asked suddenly. "All that work?" The question hit Robert hard. "I thought it did. But you know what? I don't remember most of those deals I stayed up for. What I remember are the things I missed. Your mom's birthday dinner, our anniversaries, and now everything about you." The next morning, Robert made a decision. He called his board of directors from the hospital corridor. "I'm stepping back," he told them firmly. "Effective immediately. I'll remain as chairman, but I'm appointing Li Chen as CEO." Lai had been his right hand for years. She was more than ready. "But the company," one board member protested. "The company will be fine," Robert interrupted. "My family needs me more." When he returned to Jay's room, his son was trying to sit up straighter in bed, determination on his face. "The doctor said I should try walking today." "Want some company?" Robert offered. Jay nodded, and Robert helped him stand carefully, holding his arm as they took slow steps around the room. "I've been thinking about the VR project," Jay said between careful breaths. "Tommy's dad sent me some updates. They've added some features, but I think they're making it too complicated. The whole point was to keep it simple so kids could escape into it easily." Robert nodded. "Sometimes the simplest solutions are the best ones. It took me years to learn that in business." They made another slow lap around the room. "When I get out of here," Jay said hesitantly, "maybe you could look at the code. If you want to." Robert's heart leaped, but he kept his voice casual. "I'd like that." A week later, Jay was strong enough to be discharged. As they packed up the room, a nurse brought in a tablet. "Your young patient Tommy is asking to video chat," she said with a smile. Jay's face lit up as a young boy's face appeared on screen. "Tommy, how's the space module working?" "It's okay," Tommy said, "but it's not the same without you making the changes. When are you coming back to help us explore Mars?" "Soon," Jay promised. "I've got some new ideas for the asteroid belt simulation." Robert watched the interaction, seeing how naturally Jay connected with the young patient. After the call ended, he cleared his throat. "You know, I was serious about helping with the project. Not taking over, just supporting your vision." Jay considered this. "Could we use some of Robtech's servers? The graphics lag sometimes when too many kids are online at once." "Of course, whatever you need." "And maybe," Jay hesitated, "maybe you could come to the coding club sometimes to see how we work with the kids." Robert felt tears prick at his eyes. "I'd really like that." Maya, who had been quietly packing Jay's things, smiled softly at the exchange. Later, as they waited for the discharge papers, she pulled Robert aside. "You're really doing this?" she asked, stepping back from the company. "I am," Robert said firmly. "I can't change the past 15 years, but I can be here for the next 15, if you both let me." "He talks about you differently now," Maya said. "Not like you're just the man who left, but like maybe you could be his dad." As if to prove her point, Jay called from his wheelchair, "Hey, Dad, could you help me with this jacket?" "Dad." The word hit Robert like a physical force. He hurried to help, his hands shaking slightly as he helped Jay slip his arms into the jacket. Such a simple moment, but it felt like everything. That evening, as they prepared to head home to New York, Robert caught sight of his reflection in the hospital window. He looked tired, rumpled, nothing like the polished CEO from that old magazine cover. But for the first time in his life, he felt like he was exactly where he needed to be. 3 months after Jay's return from Boston, life had fallen into a new rhythm. Robert spent his mornings at the coding club, watching Jay teach kids the basics of programming. Afternoons were for working on the VR project together, with Robert carefully following his son's lead. It wasn't always smooth. There were still moments of awkwardness, old hurts that surfaced unexpectedly, but they were building something real, one day at a time. Then came the morning that changed everything. Robert was helping Jay set up for the coding club when his phone exploded with notifications. Lai, the new CEO, was calling repeatedly. "I have to take this," Robert told Jay apologetically. "I'll be right back." Jay's face tightened slightly. He still tensed up whenever Robert's business life intruded, but he nodded. "Okay." In the hallway, Lee's voice was tense. "We've got trouble. Big trouble. Global Tech is making a move. They're trying to buy up our shares through shell companies. It looks like a hostile takeover." Robert's blood ran cold. Global Tech was known for buying companies and stripping them for parts. How bad? "They've already got 25% of our shares. Our stock is falling. People are panicking." "Robert, they could destroy everything we've built." Through the classroom window, Robert could see Jay helping a young student with her code. He promised to be there for his son, but his company, the lives of thousands of employees, was at stake. He walked back into the classroom. "Jay, something's come up." "I need to go," Jay said flatly, not looking up from the student's screen. "It's fine. I'm used to it." The words hurt, but Robert had to make a choice. "I'll make it up to you." Back at his old office, the situation was worse than he'd imagined. Global Tech had been planning this for months, waiting for him to step back. The boardroom was chaos, with executives arguing about strategies. Hours turned into days. Robert missed 2 coding club sessions. He sent Jay messages explaining, but the responses were short, distant. The wall between them was rebuilding itself, brick by brick. On the 4th day, as Robert stared at financial projections that looked increasingly hopeless, his office door opened. Jay stood there, laptop bag over his shoulder. "Mom told me what's happening," he said quietly. "About Global Tech trying to take your company." Robert rubbed his tired eyes. "Jay, I'm so sorry about missing." "I looked them up," Jay interrupted. "Global Tech. They buy companies and fire everyone, right? All those people would lose their jobs." "Yes," Robert admitted. "That's what they do." Jay walked over to Robert's desk, pulling out his laptop. "I had an idea. You said Global Tech is using automated systems to buy up shares, right? Through different shell companies." Robert nodded, not sure where this was going. "Well," Jay's fingers flew over his keyboard. "What if we could track the pattern? I've been working on an algorithm for the VR project. It helps predict which virtual environments different kids will enjoy based on their past choices, but with some modifications." For the next hour, Jay explained his idea. Robert listened, amazement growing. His son had found a pattern that all their financial experts had missed. Global Tech's automated buying system had a flaw, a tiny delay that they could use. "If we release our new software update at exactly the right moment," Jay explained, showing Robert the code, "their automated systems will freeze for about 3 minutes while they try to analyze it. That's our window to stabilize the stock and alert the SEC about their shell companies." Robert stared at his son. "This is brilliant, but why are you helping? I thought you hated this part of my life." Jay was quiet for a moment. "I used to think it was just about money for you, but Mom explained how many families depend on RobTech for their jobs. And," he hesitated, "I guess I've seen a different side of you lately. At the coding club with the hospital kids, you're not just the guy from that magazine anymore." They worked through the night, father and son, refining the plan. Robert watched in awe as Jay adapted his VR code for their needs, adding suggestions but letting his son take the lead. As dawn broke, they were ready. The next few hours were intense. They released the software update at exactly the right moment. Just as Jay had predicted, Global Tech's systems froze, confused by the new variables. In those crucial minutes, RobTech's legal team moved in, exposing the shell companies. The stock stabilized. By afternoon, Global Tech was backing off, their takeover attempt in ruins. The boardroom erupted in cheers when Robert announced their victory. But he wasn't looking at the board members. He was watching his son, who had quietly packed up his laptop and was trying to slip out. "Wait," Robert called out. Everyone turned to look at Jay. "My son saved this company today. He saw a solution that all of us missed." Jay blushed, uncomfortable with the attention. "It wasn't that big a deal. I just adapted some code I was already working on." "It was a very big deal," Robert said firmly. He turned to the board. "And it proves something I've been thinking about. RobTech needs new perspectives, younger voices. I'd like to propose creating a youth advisory board for our educational software division, with Jay as its first member, if he's interested." Jay's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" But Robert added quickly, "Only if it doesn't interfere with the coding club or your hospital project. Those come first." A slow smile spread across Jay's face, the kind of smile Robert was still learning, still treasuring every time he saw it. "I'd like that," Jay said, "as long as we can keep it simple, like the VR project." "Simple is good," Robert agreed. As the board members filed out, already talking about damage control and press releases, Robert put his arm around his son's shoulders. To his relief, Jay didn't pull away. "Hey, Dad," Jay said as they headed for the elevator. "Next time something like this happens, Just tell me. You don't have to choose between the company and me. Maybe we can figure it out together." Robert hugged his son closer, his throat tight with emotion. All those years chasing success, and here it was, in a form he'd never expected, teaching him lessons he'd never known he needed to learn. 1 year had passed since that first chance meeting at the charity gala. Robert stood in the back of the school auditorium, watching the stage being set up for the graduation ceremony. Jay was graduating a year early. His brilliant mind had let him skip ahead, though Robert suspected the real reason was his son's eagerness to start working on expanding the VR project full-time. Nervous? Maya appeared beside him, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed him one. She still remembered how he took it, even after all these years. "Is it that obvious?" Robert smiled, accepting the coffee. "You're doing that thing with your tie again," she pointed out. Robert realized he was indeed fidgeting with his tie, just like he used to during big business presentations. "He asked me to sit in the family section," Robert said quietly. "With you." Maya nodded. "I know. He told me last night." She paused, then added, "He's proud to have you there, you know. Both of us." The auditorium was filling up now. Through the crowd, Robert spotted Tommy from the hospital, walking with a cane but looking healthy, his parents beside him. Several kids from the coding club were there too, wearing t-shirts with the logo of Jay's VR project, which had now expanded to children's hospitals across the country. "Remember when we were terrified of messing him up?" Maya asked suddenly. "When he was born, and we had no idea what we were doing?" "You did an amazing job," Robert said sincerely. "He's incredible, Maya. Everything good in him, that's because of you." Maya shook her head. "Not everything. That brilliant mind of his, the way he sees solutions nobody else can see, that's all you. And this past year, you've given him something I couldn't. A chance to know himself better by knowing where he came from." The lights dimmed, signaling the start of the ceremony. As they took their seats in the family section, Robert thought about how much had changed. The Youth Advisory Board had been a huge success, with Jay leading initiatives to make technology more accessible to underprivileged kids. RobTech was different now too, more focused on impact than just profit. Lai was doing an excellent job as CEO, and Robert didn't miss his old life of endless meetings and missed connections. When Jay's name was called, Robert and Maya both stood up, clapping proudly. Jay walked across the stage, his honor cords swaying, and for a moment, Robert saw all the versions of his son at once. The baby he'd never known, the angry teenager at the coffee shop, the brilliant young man who'd saved his company, and now this confident graduate ready to take on the world. After the ceremony, they found Jay in the crowd. He was showing Tommy's parents something on his tablet, probably the latest VR update. "Dad," Jay called out when he saw them. "Come here, I want to show you something." Robert still felt a warm glow every time Jay called him Dad. It had taken months of small moments, kept promises, and genuine effort to earn that title. Jake pulled up a presentation on his tablet. "Remember how you said the youth board should think big? Well, I've been working on an idea. What if we could adapt the VR system for schools in rural areas? Kids who can't get to good science labs or art studios could still have those experiences virtually." Robert listened as his son outlined his vision, marveling at how Jay had taken the best of both his parents, Maya's compassion and Robert's business sense, and turned them into something uniquely his own. "What do you think?" Jay asked finally. "Too ambitious?" "I think it's perfect," Robert said. "But you know what I think doesn't matter. You've proven you know exactly what you're doing." "Actually," Jay said, looking slightly nervous, "it does matter. Because I was hoping, maybe we could work on it together. For real this time as partners. You handling the business side, me leading the development. Only if you want to, though." Robert felt tears threatening. "I'd be honored," he managed to say. Later that evening, they all had dinner together, Robert, Maya, Jay, and several of Jay's friends from the coding club. As Robert watched his son laughing and talking excitedly about future plans, he thought about how close he'd come to missing all of this. One chance meeting, one moment of recognition, and his whole life had changed course. Maya caught his eye across the table and smiled knowingly. They'd never rekindled their romance, too much had changed for that. But they'd found something else. A friendship built on their shared love for their son and their understanding of how precious second chances could be. As the evening wound down, Jay pulled Robert aside. "Hey, Dad. Thanks for sticking around this time. I know it wasn't easy, especially at first when I was, well, pretty awful to you." "You had every right to be," Robert said. "I'm just grateful you gave me a chance to prove I could change." "Well," Jay grinned, "you proved it. And you know what? I think we make a pretty good team." Robert hugged his son, remembering how awkward their first hug had been, how far they'd come. "The best team," he agreed. Outside the restaurant, the city lights twinkled like stars. Robert watched Jay and his friends planning to meet up later, saw Maya smiling proudly at their son, and felt, for the first time in his life, completely at peace. He hadn't lost his success by choosing family, he'd just redefined what success meant. It wasn't about money or power or business empires. It was about this. The simple joy of being present, of being part of something real, of finally getting his priorities right.